In the heart of the Cotswolds is Gatcombe Park, Princess Anne's private residence.
For Anne, Gatcombe is home, and it's very much where she can relax.
I think when she gets to Gatcombe, she can actually breathe.
A sprawling 1,263-acre estate hidden away deep in the Gloucestershire countryside.
They wanted privacy and seclusion, and Gatcombe Park really was perfect for a young couple.
It was quiet, it was peaceful, and that was priceless.
Princess Anne transformed this damp and run-down manor house.
It needed new plumbing, new electrics, new everything.
Turning it into a beloved 9-bedroom family home where she can truly be herself.
It is somewhere that she can kick off her riding boots, she can have a cup of tea and a quick gin and tonic, and no one is going to disturb her. I think probably it's the most unroyal of all the royal residences.
And its wider estate is still home to her children today.
Gatcombe Park sort of has this magnetic power.
But it hasn't always been plain sailing at Gatcombe.
From the early 80s, there was gossip, rumours about Princess Anne and Mark having affairs.
Divorce? Very mirror. Never been mentioned by anybody.
Through good times and bad, this secluded country home has been a constant comfort for the princess. It has also proved to be a happy home for Olympians and their horses.
The really lovely thing was that the Princess Royal was able to present a medal to her own daughter.
But the estate doesn't come for free. It must pay its own way to survive.
Princess Anne had always said that she couldn't justify having this huge property, having all these acres of land, if it didn't pay for itself.
Gatcombe Park, a private royal residence that only a privileged few have been invited to visit. Until now. In June 2024, Princess Anne was injured in what Buckingham Palace described as an incident at her home, Gatcombe Park, in Gloucestershire.
Princess Anne was alone, walking on the estate at Gatcombe Park, and obviously she's a very experienced horsewoman, but something happened while she was with the horse.
Probably what happened was that a horse struck her either with its head or with its legs on Princess Anne's head. And we don't know how long she was out before, literally knocked out, before she was found. Local people were worried for Princess Anne because they saw an air ambulance landing on the estate.
The air ambulance wasn't needed in the end, but Princess Anne was taken by normal ambulance by road to Southmead Hospital in Bristol.
Buckingham Palace described Princess Anne's head injury as minor, but said that she had suffered a concussion.
People often are rather suspicious of reports of royal illnesses and feel they're not getting the full story. But I think for a woman in her 70s to get a concussion and to be knocked unconscious is always going to be a serious matter.
The details around the accident are still a bit of a mystery because she can't remember what happened, and the horse obviously was there, she was there, but nobody else was there.
The princess spent 5 days recovering in hospital. Her husband, Timothy Lawrence, was a regular visitor.
How's your wife, sir? She doing well? Recovering slowly. Thank you very much.
I don't think Princess Anne's ever had 5 days of doing absolutely nothing in her entire life, so she was obviously itching to get out of the hospital.
And when she was finally discharged, there was only one place Princess Anne wanted to go, Gatcombe Park.
Recovering at home was perfect because of the privacy, because it is secluded and her family are there, not just her husband, Tim, but her children are around too.
So she had lots of people to drop in, check in on her, keep her company during that period of time.
Princess Anne's much-loved home, Gatcombe Park, is a vast Gloucestershire country estate.
The Gatcombe Park estate stretches over 1,263 acres, and that includes 250 acres of woodland and hundreds of acres of farmland.
It's only 2.5 hours away from London, which makes it an ideal location for Anne to be shooting off across the country for all of those royal engagements.
So Anne, for much of her life, has regarded herself almost like a weekly commuter, coming up to London for a week of duties, but always coming back to the haven of Gatcombe at the end of the week.
She does have somewhere she can stay in London. It's a very nice address. It's an apartment at St James's Palace. Does she want to stay in London that much? No. She wants to head back home to Gatcombe Park.
I think when she gets to Gatcombe, she can actually breathe.
There's something so timeless about the location of her estate between these two darling villages in the Cotswolds, Minchinhampton and Avening, actually just a stone's throw from Charles's Highgrove.
And just like Highgrove, the manor house at Gatcombe Park is an 18th century Grade II listed property.
Gatcombe's a really pretty Cotswold great house. It's vision in limestone on a plum site on the side of a hill.
It's a really pleasing house to look at because it's so even and perfect, and it sits there in a sort of very unassuming, welcoming way.
And you've got that gorgeous view across the Cotswolds, just with a belt of trees all the way around it.
It's a rather nice house architecturally, with 7 bays, so like 7 window widths, with a lovely conservatory on one side.
The conservatory is long, it's also curved, it's full of plants. It's really nice to think that Princess Anne and Sir Timothy would just go in there and maybe have a cup of tea, be surrounded by the plants, and then overlook the wonderful views that they've got.
Most of us would call Princess Anne's home a mansion, but by royal standards, it's fairly modest.
Gatcombe's got 9 bedrooms, 4 reception rooms. I mean, these are not enormous numbers. It's not a regular house, as most of us would know, but it's not a palace either. It sits quite comfortably in between.
This is a country home, but it is a beautiful, large country home. The bedrooms are upstairs, and Princess Anne has a large bedroom with a beautiful fireplace.
But if you turn up at the house, you might well be welcomed by the Princess Royal herself. A famous broadcaster I know said that when she lived as a girl in Gloucestershire and she won some prize and she went to the house to get it, and there was at the door Princess Anne, invited her in. She said that the predominant feeling of the house was it smelt a bit doggy, but there were lots of toys and clutter.
I think Anne really wanted a comfortable family home. She didn't want a royal residence.
But this huge estate isn't just home to a princess in her 70s. Anne has also kept her children close.
Zara and Mike Tyndall live on Aston Farm, which is part of the Gatcombe Park estate, and they have their children there too. So it's a lovely family home, a modern family home.
Zara and Mike are a celebrity couple. She's not a working member of the royal family, so they've been able to pursue their own careers.
And they've definitely brought a bit of glamour, I think, to Gatcombe Park.
Zara is an extrovert. Mike is an extrovert. He obviously was a big rugby star, winning the World Cup, and he's a fun guy.
Zara and Mike Tyndall, they love to have a good time, as we very well know, so much so that they've got a party barn on Aston Farm.
But also on the estate, there's Peter Phillips, her son, his family are there. And there have been comings and goings over the years, but basically they're all sort of near each other.
So in her 5th decade of living there, it's become a real haven for the whole of Princess Anne's family. I think it's everything that Anne would have wished for when she first moved there in 1977.
But how did Princess Anne transform the neglected country pile at Gatcombe Park into an idyllic family house that she and her children have made a very special home? Princess Anne's journey to discover her beloved Cotswold home at Gatcombe Park started with a fairy tale royal wedding.
So, the bride and groom come out, and you can hear the welcome from the crowd.
On the 14th of November 1973, the princess married Army Captain Mark Phillips.
Princess Anne was the first of the late Queen and Philip's children to marry, and it was a big deal in 1973 when they had a huge wedding at Westminster Abbey. We forget about it now because of the later wedding of Charles and Diana. It was a big, glamorous thing, and she looked fantastic.
The Queen wanted to buy her daughter a home as a wedding gift, so the princess and her new husband started house hunting.
Now, what they wanted was a country estate within a few hours of London, the best of both worlds. Anne and Mark looked everywhere at various houses, but nothing was quite right. They rejected quite a few.
Ironically, one of the places they looked at was Highgrove House, which is now the King's private residence in Gloucestershire. Anne ruled it out because of privacy, really. It's too close to the road, and also the house was too big.
One property that Princess Anne hadn't looked at yet was Gatcombe Park. It was the country home of Conservative politician Rab Butler. He had inherited the estate from his father-in-law when he died in 1947.
Rab Butler was one of the most prominent politicians of the first half of the 20th century.
R.A. Butler, or Rab as he was known, was said to be the best Prime Minister we never had.
Butler was now in his 70s and wanted to sell Gatcombe Park to free up some cash for his retirement.
It had been a lovely country house for the Butlers when their children were young, but they wanted to downsize and they didn't need a large country estate.
When Butler heard that Princess Anne was looking for a home, he saw an opportunity.
Harry Butler got a message to them, just to say Gatcombe Park would be available, encouraged them to come and have a look at it.
Rab probably has a direct line to the Queen, who knows? But anyway, he tips off the royal couple.
Although Gatcombe Park was outside the couple's original search area, they agreed to see it anyway. But when they arrived, they soon realised this wasn't a ready-made royal residence.
After World War II, the economy didn't favour the survival of country houses, and many were lost. Gatcombe survived, but in a state.
As is often the case when you've got a country house which has been neglected, I think it just needed a complete refresh and overhaul.
But Princess Anne was able to look past Gatcombe Park's flaws.
They wanted privacy and seclusion, and Gatcombe Park really was perfect for a young couple.
They stood on the doorstep and looked out over this gorgeous view of the rolling hills. It was quiet, it was peaceful, and that was priceless to them. The house could be fixed, the damp could be fixed, but the privacy that it afforded, the view that it gave them, couldn't be replicated anywhere else.
You couldn't ask for more. It's the perfect location for the Princess Royal.
Anne fell in love with it, and the Queen signed the cheque.
It's not a surprise at all that the late Queen helped Anne buy Gatcombe Park, because that is, if she had been able to choose her ideal existence without any of the royal duties, that's what she would have done. She would have lived on a farm with loads of horses, but she was the Queen. And I'm sure she loved the fact that that's what her daughter Anne was able to do.
The Queen never revealed what she paid for Gatcombe Park back in 1976, but it's thought to be around £500,000. And at that time, in the 70s, that was 40 times the average price of a house in London.
But Rab Butler was a bit nervous about the sale, given the state the house was in.
I discussed Gatcombe Park with Butler early in my time at Cambridge when he was Master of Trinity College. And I suppose it must have given him some pride that he was about to sell Gatcombe Park to Her Majesty the Queen. And he said to me, I hope she doesn't ask about the dry rot.
He was relieved when the deal was finally done.
He did say, although not to me, to the royal family had driven a hard bargain, but rather amusingly, he was pleased it had gone to a good family.
Princess Anne and her husband adored their new home, but it was a risky choice.
The Queen had purchased Gatcombe Park for Anne and Mark, but she wasn't going to pay for the refurbishment.
Suddenly, the couple had to fund an expensive renovation, and doubts started creeping in about the scale of the estate too.
Anne at the time was quite worried about taking on such a big prospect.
The house was very run down, it needed renovation, total renovation, and also they really wanted a house with about 20 to 70 acres. Instead, they now had a gigantic estate of over 700 acres.
Would Gatcombe Park prove too much for Anne and Mark to handle?
They've taken on this huge renovation project, but will they be able to get it up to scratch without breaking the bank?
When the Queen bought Gatcombe Park for Princess Anne in 1976, it was the first time it had been owned by a royal.
I think part of the attraction for Gatcombe was it wasn't a county with royal associations. It was a bit of a blank canvas for the Queen buying it for her daughter. The house originally was built by somebody called Edward Shepherd, who's described as a clothier, so a kind of local businessman and farmer.
Shepherd commissioned the construction of the original manor house in 1771.
It was designed to be an elegant, rectangular, two-storey home with an attic and basement. It was graceful, and it was really there to make a mark as a real stake in Georgian taste.
Gatcombe Park stayed in the Shepherd family until 1814, when it was sold to an economist and MP, David Ricardo.
David Ricardo did very well on the stock market before becoming a Member of Parliament, so he wanted a statement of his wealth.
He had the original manor house extended, adding new wings to either side, a monumental entrance and a conservatory. Then in 1937, Gatcombe Park changed hands again. Its new owner was art collector Samuel Courtauld, one of the founders of the famous Courtauld Institute of Art in London.
The fact that Samuel Courtauld, this man with a real eye for beauty and design, bought Gatcombe Park, that suggests how very beautiful it was as a property.
When Courtauld died in 1947, he left Gatcombe to his son-in-law Rab Butler, but he had no idea that the next residents would be British royalty. Newlyweds, Princess Anne and her husband, Mark Phillips, got the keys to Gatcombe Park in September 1976. Now it was time to get down to business.
About £40,000 has had to be spent on decorating, alterations and dealing with that curse of many country houses, woodworm.
£40,000 then was a lot of money. I mean, now it's a lot of money, but it also had to be managed along the way, and that was up to Princess Anne. So she'd taken on a huge project, an expensive project.
Anne and Mark actually had to get a mortgage to pay to update the house. And what tends to happen in these country houses is they're a bit of a money pit.
They had to dig deep into their own finances to get the house fit for habitation.
Once the cash came through from the bank, they got stuck into their home makeover.
It needed new plumbing, new electrics, new everything.
Princess Anne completely gutted out the kitchen and all the bathrooms in the house and completely renovated them.
The princess was also adamant that the upstairs layout at Gatcombe Park needed to be revamped.
Originally, all the bathrooms are at the front of the house and the bedrooms are at the back of the house.
Which means the natural light that comes into the building at the front was being received in the bathroom. Well, it's fine, you want a bit of light in the bathroom, but actually the reality is it's better in a bedroom.
So she completely gutted that floor and turned it around, switched it essentially. So all your bedrooms with all the natural light would be at the front and the bathrooms were at the back. And that was a huge project that made a really big difference to the house.
When it came to the interiors of Gatcombe Park, the princess recruited a pro.
So the royal couple hired the then fashionable interior designer David Hicks.
He was married to Pamela Hicks, who was Lord Mountbatten's daughter, and Lord Mountbatten was Prince Philip's uncle. So there was a royal connection, and David Hicks really was the designer to the great and the good, the aristocracy, the very rich. One of his wallpaper designs was actually put on the walls of Nixon's White House.
Hicks was known for his use of bold colours and patterns, seen here in one of his iconic wallpaper designs. He was keen to apply this vibrant style to Gatcombe Park. But when he told the newlyweds how much his vision for the property's decor would cost, they were in for a shock.
Interior designers are quite good at coming up with expensive home improvement options, but the royal pockets weren't as deep as he would have liked.
His quote for all that needs doing, if it's going to be top spec, from wallpaper down, is deemed too dear.
It was way more than Princess Anne had budgeted for and way more than she wanted to pay.
So they substituted a lot of the concepts that he had for lookalikes on a budget. And some of the rooms Princess Anne designed herself.
And I'm sure that any of us were to go around Gatcombe now, you'd definitely find some kind of IKEA furniture or sofas or cushions, because she absolutely is that kind of royal.
The renovations at Gatcombe Park needed to cater for more than just its new human residents. When Princess Anne and Mark Phillips chose the property, it wasn't just for the potential of the manor house. Gatcombe Park had a farm and 730 acres of land, so they knew it would make a great home for their beloved horses too.
Having horses around them and, you know, just at the back door, that would have been the absolutely key thing.
Horses are what brought her and Mark together. That's how they met, and horses obviously were a central part of their lives.
You can't underestimate the obsession, the equine obsession that runs through them like a stick of rock.
When Anne married Captain Phillips, he was very dashing and he was the most amazing horseman. And they had that in common.
In the early 70s, Anne and Mark really were the golden couple of British equestrianism. They rode at World Championships, they rode at the Olympics as well. They were very, very good at what they did.
Given the couple's mutual love for riding, horses were always going to be factored into the renovation plans.
Now, there was stables on the estate, but they were pretty run down and old-fashioned. So they redid the stables, redid them from scratch to make a lovely home for their horses.
But whilst it was the comfort of humans and horses keeping Princess Anne awake at night, the palace security team had other worries. They needed to work out how to keep the princess safe on the sprawling estate.
Mark and Anne moved into Gatcombe just a couple of years after what is one of the biggest security breaches in royal history.
In March 1974, an armed man had tried to kidnap Princess Anne for ransom.
Anne and Mark were returning to Buckingham Palace from an event nearby. They had just turned onto the Mall. And this car is in front of them and blocks them off.
The driver of that car was Ian Ball. He opened fire trying to get to Princess Anne. An eyewitness described how Mark Phillips tried to shield the princess.
And the gunman came round and he was at the front of by the bonnet, and as Mark saw him coming round, he pushed Anne back into the car and got in himself, and they were like this inside.
Ian Ball shot 4 people in the fracas, in the commotion. He first of all shot Anne's bodyguard for the Metropolitan Police, then the chauffeur, and then also a passing journalist and a police officer also got shot trying to stop him.
It obviously was a chaotic situation and very confusing, but as you would expect, Princess Anne reacted coolly, and when the gunman told her to get out of the car, she famously responded, "Not bloody likely."
In the end, Ball was disarmed by police and members of the public.
It was Ball's misfortune that one of the passers-by was a professional boxer called Ronnie, who he says he hit him as hard as he could.
Princess Anne was unharmed. 3 of the injured men needed surgery, but luckily everyone who was shot survived. This huge security breach led to the immediate bolstering of royal protection.
Essentially, the day after, there were more people on guard, there were better weapons, and they had been better trained.
In the aftermath of this frightening event, Princess Anne's security team needed a strategy to make sure her safety wouldn't be compromised at Gatcombe Park.
The attempted kidnapping event was incredibly serious. Certainly, royal security were absolutely on their knees about it. It was very, very embarrassing for them. So it was very much on their minds when Anne and Mark bought Gatcombe. They had to do everything they could to keep the Queen's only daughter safe.
The interesting thing about Gatcombe as a royal property is that it was almost the first of its kind. Most royals were, living in London or at Windsor on the great estate and parkland, which was already covered by royal security. So they had to set the blueprint with Gatcombe.
Gatcombe Park's secluded location gave the royal security team a helping hand.
The house is not signposted from the road, so you have to know where it is, and you can't actually see the house from the road either.
The other thing is, once you get out into the Cotswolds, there's not that many roads. If you spot a car you don't recognise with some dodgy dude in it, probably all the locals will be talking about it before they've even arrived at Anne's front door.
One of the security arrangements that was put in place at Gatcombe Park was to have a member of Gloucestershire Police right in front of the estate 24/7. And that person would also vet anyone who was going in and out.
Not only was security at Gatcombe Park a huge consideration, but they also needed to find someone to run the estate. It was the perfect job for Captain Mark Phillips, who had decided to leave the army.
He obviously had a very successful career in equestrianism, so he wanted to continue that, and he didn't want to be a working member of the royal family. He wanted to get on with running Gatcombe Park.
Mark Phillips had a lot to do in this role and he had to prepare for it. So he took on a course in farming at the Royal Agricultural College to be able to basically figure out what he was doing in managing this huge estate.
But what Mark lacked in experience, he more than made up for in confidence, opting to expand the already massive estate before they'd even moved in.
In 1977, Mark Phillips was asked if he'd like to buy a neighbouring farm, Aston Farm.
It was 530 acres. And they weren't sure what to do, they weren't sure if they could afford it.
So the Bank of Mum, the late Queen, came to the rescue there and bought Aston Farm because Anne had spent pretty much all of her money on the first property.
The Queen set the wheels in motion to purchase Aston Farm in October 1977. Princess Anne was about to take on an even bigger estate, but the manor house still wasn't ready for them to move in. And they needed to get the renovation finished quickly because Anne and Mark were about to become parents.
Anne was 8 months pregnant at the time, and of course, like any young couple who were renovating their house, the pressure was really on to have the house done in time so that she and Mark and the young baby could all move in together.
After almost an entire year of building work, Princess Anne and her husband moved into Gatcombe Park with their newborn son in November 1977.
The oldest of the Queen's grandchildren, Peter Phillips, was born just 10 days before they moved into Gatcombe Park. It was a kind of perfect family home.
Even the attic has been renovated, it's been turned into a nursery. So super exciting. They have a new estate, a new house, a new baby.
It had been a chaotic few years, but now Princess Anne had the family home she'd always dreamed of. A place where this hard-working royal could escape the limelight. But there was no time to relax.
Anne was juggling pretty much everything. It must have been quite a strain for a young mum. She had a massive new house and an even bigger estate. And she had her growing duties as a working member of the royal family.
And the princess needed Gatcombe Park to start making money, because its bills weren't going to be picked up by the taxpayer.
The pressure was really on at this point because Gatcombe Park had huge running costs. And it had to run itself, it had to pay for itself without help from the public purse.
They knew they had bitten off way more than they could chew with, buying not one farm but two, and they really just had to work out a way of making it pay.
The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Princess Anne and her husband couldn't figure out a way to balance the books, they faced having to sell up and leave Gatcombe Park for good. In May 1981, Gatcombe Park became home to a family of 4 when Princess Anne and Mark Phillips welcomed their second child, Zara.
All reports say that Anne was smitten with her daughter. She was a mum for the second time, and actually I think Gatcombe was the perfect place to be raising that family in the way that Anne wanted to.
Like all royal children, Zara and Peter had a nanny, but Anne was still a very hands-on mother.
On Nanny's day off, she would look after the children and she'd make their beds, she'd make them tea. She wouldn't think anything of that.
Princess Anne wanted her children to have a normal upbringing, and that meant breaking a long-standing royal tradition.
Being lower down the pecking order in the royal family, Anne knew that her children probably wouldn't be working royals. And so when the Queen offered to give them their HRH status as grandchildren of the monarch, she declined.
She knew that their lives would be simpler and probably very much happier if they didn't have the problem of having to live up to being a prince and princess.
Gatcombe Park was the perfect setting for Princess Anne to give Peter and Zara a relaxed childhood away from the limelight.
Whenever I've interviewed either Peter or Zara, they've always talked about their childhood as being brought up with sort of dogs and horses and animals.
They both learnt to ride horses from a young age on the estate. They would be climbing trees and playing in the garden.
Peter had the run of the farm. Imagine for a little boy having all that farm machinery and tractors, and they would all do the harvest together, so it was a bit like a sort of Enid Blyton book.
We might say that Peter and Zara's uniforms as children were dungarees and wellies, very much suited to farm life.
It's been said that when their cousins came to visit, they weren't usually as suitably dressed for exploring the estate.
I think William and Harry, when they used to go to Gatcombe from Highgrove, which isn't far away, they would arrive in all their little neat shorts and little button shoes and little white socks, all looking spick and span. Of course, they go back absolutely filthy, having had the most wonderful time.
William and Harry are amongst the lucky few that have been invited to visit Gatcombe Park over the years. Because it's a private residence, most of us rarely get to look inside the manor house on the estate. But the few images we have seen reveal how the princess likes to keep her home.
From the glimpses we get into Gatcombe, you've got a house of innately beautiful proportions, filled with furniture which is accrued, is comfortable, knickknacks of Anne's enthusiasms.
I think probably it's the most unroyal of all the royal residences. It's very homely. The sofas are chintzy. There's horse paraphernalia everywhere.
This house is not projecting any royal image. It's just giving her comfort, and it would strike so many reminders of the houses that we would see. Go and visit your auntie on a Sunday, you'd probably find a lot of the same china.
Although Anne runs Gatcombe Park as a laid-back, comfortable home, she is meticulous when it comes to preparing for guests.
For all Anne's apparent casualness, when she does have people to stay, she wants everything to be just right. Like her mother used to do, she would go and check the bedrooms before her guests came, make sure that there's, some interesting books and everything is just so.
Whilst the 9 bedrooms at Gatcombe Park could easily house most of Anne's guests, the same couldn't be said for her most senior royal relatives.
The manor house at Gatcombe Park was modest by royal standards, and the Queen actually couldn't stay there.
So lucky that it wasn't too far away from Windsor. A couple of hours, darling, and you're at Gatcombe. It's all right, you can go riding together with your daughter. Hopefully get back home in time for dinner.
This system by which the Queen popped into Gatcombe Park for day trips and then headed back to London or Windsor worked very well. But then, in December 1981, the Queen had been paying a winter visit to see baby Zara, to see toddler Peter. What happened on the way back? A massive snowstorm, and the Queen's driver realised they could not go on any further.
They actually had to take refuge and stay the night in a pub, which I think was probably rather a lot of fun for Elizabeth.
The poor pub owner would be rushing around trying to get everything done, because when do you get the Queen popping into your pub?
Whilst the limited space at Gatcombe Park's manor house led to a night in a pub for the Queen, Princess Anne's wider estate certainly wasn't lacking in size. Gatcombe Park stretches over 1,263 acres, and its running costs are high. When the princess moved in, it was on the condition that the estate would not rely on the public purse.
Gatcombe Park Estate is run as a business, and it's not funded by the taxpayer in any way, shape or form.
The Princess Royal is a wealthy woman. She does used to be the civil list, but it's now money from the sovereign grant. But the truth is that she's not got the money to subsidise Gatcombe Park.
It has to be a commercially viable estate, and that means that if it's not, then there's a risk that she may need to leave.
So from a standing start in the 1980s, they had to come up with commercial ideas. This wasn't one of the great estates like Chatsworth, where there was a history of opening to the public and events and shops. They had to start from scratch.
In 1983, Princess Anne opened Gatcombe Park to the public for the first time, hosting an equestrian event on the estate.
They set up the Festival of British Eventing, which took place annually at Gatcombe.
It really took off right from the beginning because the cross-country course is so dramatic and so different from anywhere else.
The princess's home provided a stunning backdrop for the competition.
I think it was a big spectator bonus, not only to be watching this extraordinary sport, but also to be able to look at the princess's home. And it did attract quite a lot of paying spectators.
It was very popular. It was one of the highlights of the equestrian calendar.
And horses weren't the only animals helping to keep Gatcombe Park's accounts in the black.
The estate was already home to a working farm when Anne and Mark took it over, so they kept that going.
It wasn't a big arable farm, and there were some crops there, but mostly it was livestock.
Princess Anne and her husband spearheaded these commercial ventures, which paid towards the estate's running costs. Between managing Gatcombe Park and raising their young family, Anne and Mark were kept busy throughout the 1980s. The princess also stepped up her royal duties.
After Anne had Peter and Zara, she sort of threw herself back into royal life. She would take on whatever engagements her mother wanted her to do. And she started becoming a really definitive member of the firm.
But no matter how hard they worked, Princess Anne and her husband were constantly targeted by the press.
I think there was a lot of interest in this massive estate that they bought and what was behind all those hedges and all those trees. And there was one story that circulated in the tabloids that perhaps they had a swimming pool for their horses.
The papers made it out as if it was some Olympic-sized swimming pool that the horses were all swimming around in. But actually, it was an area where you could do hydrotherapy for the horses' legs. And it wasn't an example of excess. This is a sign of how forward-thinking Mark and Anne were in the running of their stables.
Some stories were more damaging and personal.
From the early 80s, there was gossip, rumours about Princess Anne and Mark having affairs.
They weren't seen together that much. And just as with Charles and Diana later, that's how the rumours start.
Princess Anne ignored the rumours. She adopted that royal mantra of never complain, never explain, and she said nothing.
But the stories kept coming.
The rumours were in the papers almost every week. There was a scandal brewing for sure.
And what happened next would change life at Gatcombe Park forever. On the surface, life at Gatcombe Park throughout the 80s appeared to be normal. Princess Anne and her husband seemed to ignore the tabloid chatter about their marriage.
I think Princess Anne's response to that would have been naff off. It was no one else's business what was happening with her and her husband at Gatcombe.
The headlines came and went, but then one story changed everything.
In April 1989, the Sun had this bombshell exclusive.
They had 4 intimate letters addressed to Princess Anne, and they were not from her husband.
The Sun said these letters had been anonymously dropped off with them, and they didn't print them. They gave them to the police, and Scotland Yard opened an investigation.
It was important to determine not only who had taken the letters, but where they'd been stolen from. Was it possible that there had been a security breach at Anne's Gatcombe Park home?
The police figured out that the letters had actually been stolen from Buckingham Palace and not Gatcombe Park.
If it had turned out that those letters had been stolen from her private residence in the Gloucestershire countryside, I think that would have been devastating for Princess Anne.
Although the police investigation gave Anne some answers, it couldn't identify the letter thief.
At one time they suspected one of the maids, but to this day we don't know who really took them.
Though the content of the letters was never published, the damage was done. And in a shock move, the palace released a statement revealing one crucial detail.
In response to the Sun's inquiries to Buckingham Palace, they named the person who had written the letters, and this was the Queen's equerry, Tim Lawrence.
We didn't know anything about Timothy Lawrence, but he certainly became well known from that point onwards.
It was very embarrassing for Princess Anne, and indeed more for Tim Lawrence, because he's working for the Queen and he's been writing love letters to her married daughter.
Once the tabloids had Timothy Lawrence's name, they kept digging for more information about his relationship with the princess.
I have no comment to make on the news at all. Do you think that your friend...
Stories came out, further stories, that basically said that Princess Anne had been visiting Tim Lawrence's home in Winchester. Princess Anne's aides and his neighbours had been sort of keeping this secret for them over the years.
After the letters were discovered, Anne and Mark separated.
Princess Anne tried to carry on with life as normal at Gatcombe Park, but rumours about divorce started to circulate in the press, much to her disdain.
Divorce? Very mirror.
Never been mentioned by anybody.
For Princess Anne, she made clear at that time that divorce was not on the cards, and she denied it point blank.
Then another headline ended any chance of a reconciliation between Princess Anne and her husband.
In 1991, Heather Tonkin, a lady from New Zealand, revealed that she had had a relationship with Mark Phillips and in fact had had a child from that relationship. And of course the DNA test proved that Mark was the father of that little girl.
So that was the sort of death knell of the marriage completely, and then they got very swiftly divorced. I don't think Captain Phillips really knew what was happening. It was so quick.
Anne and Mark divorced in April 1992. Despite the very public scandals, their breakup wasn't nearly as dramatic as the press coverage made it seem.
It wasn't a messy divorce. There was sort of an inevitability about it. You know, from 20 years before, they had been this glamorous young couple in the royal family, and then they grew apart.
Anne and Mark's relationship after they divorced was much better than when they were still married. They remained on very good terms, they were very amicable, and of course, Mark still lived on the Gatcombe estate.
Mark stayed at Gatcombe Park in the Aston farmhouse, so, I guess that's one of the advantages of owning a massive farm.
Mark's home was just a few minutes' drive from Gatcombe Park's manor house and his ex-wife, Princess Anne.
It might be unusual for a divorced couple to be living so close together, but they were all very sophisticated about it. I'm sure it wasn't as easy as it looks, but it worked for the moment.
And Mark didn't only stay on as a resident at Gatcombe Park, he kept his job as manager of the estate too.
They don't just have two children, they have a way of life. They have a working life, a farm life, an equestrian life, all shared. They still had a shared interest in making Gatcombe estate work.
And soon there was going to be a second husband living at Gatcombe Park.
About 8 months after their divorce was finalised, Princess Anne married Tim Lawrence. They couldn't get married in England because a divorcee still couldn't get remarried in the Church of England.
Anne and Tim went to Crathy Church, which is on the Balmoral estate, and they had a very quiet but very happy wedding. And the Queen really was very happy about it, obviously because she was very fond of Timothy Lawrence.
4 years after the nuptials of Princess Anne and Timothy Lawrence, the population at Gatcombe Park grew again when Mark Phillips married for the second time.
Captain Phillips remarried an American dressage rider called Sandy Pfluger, and she moved into Aston Farm.
So if you can imagine, you've got Princess Anne and Tim Lawrence up in the main house, and then on Aston Farm, you've got Mark Phillips and his new wife as well.
So it was a blended family before we used the phrase blended family, but that's what it was, and obviously, with the separate properties, it made it a lot easier.
This unorthodox setup seemed to work most of the time. Clashes between Anne and Mark were rare, but arguments were usually settled by an unlikely peacemaker.
I believe that Tim, he's a pretty sober kind of bloke, isn't he? He's something of a mediator, I believe, between Mark and Anne, who are more hot-headed, dare I say it?
If there was any disagreements between Princess Anne and Mark Phillips, Tim Lawrence would step in and try and smooth things over.
As far as we know, Mark, husband number one, and Tim, husband number two, do get on. And, they live close to each other on this huge farm. So, they're seeing each other the whole time.
The amicable relationship between Princess Anne and her ex-husband was good for the couple's children.
Their children can still stay with their mum in the main house in the main part of Gatcombe Park, but their dad was still around. They could see him all the time because he was still on the estate. So they still got to grow up together as a family.
And it was these fond childhood memories that made both of Princess Anne's children want to live at Gatcombe Park when they got older.
Both Peter and Zara went off and did their own thing, but as is often the case these days, they came back to mum and dad at some point in their 20s and early 30s, and, Gatcombe Park has the space.
But you do, I think, understand why Gatcombe has always felt like something that they want to replay, revisit, and ultimately live in. Because it is comfortable, it is really home.
Peter has always really lived on the Gatcombe estate. He was living there when he met Autumn Phillips, and they got married and had their two daughters, Isla and Savannah. After university, Zara moved into the Bothy, which was one of the small sort of cottages on the Gatcombe estate,
and she moves in with her then boyfriend, Mike Tyndall. Zara met Mike at the Rugby World Cup in Australia in 2003.
Mike, he's a rugby star. Played for Bath and for Gloucester and for England again and again.
He's sort of a breath of fresh air, and you could tell when he was around William and Harry, they loved having him around. A, they're massive rugby fans, but B, he's just funny and doesn't take them or the whole royal bubble too seriously.
Zara and Mike's relationship caught the attention of the press.
When you had, one of England's most famous rugby players going out with the granddaughter of the monarchs, there was a lot of interest in their relationship.
Zara and Mike became a bit of a celebrity couple, and they just brought glamour and fun to Gatcombe Park estate.
But the young couple weren't initially keen to settle down under Princess Anne's watchful gaze. Around 2010, Zara and Mike left their Gatcombe Park cottage. They traded the countryside for a 4-storey townhouse in Cheltenham.
Zara and Mike actually bought a house in Cheltenham because it was closer to where Mike was playing for a local rugby team, and also I think they fancied a bit of kind of more city life.
This house in Cheltenham was quite important. They not only announced their engagement with a press call from the house, but it was also their first married home.
But their urban experiment didn't last long.
After they got married and started looking ahead to starting a family, they were drawn back to the Gatcombe Park estate.
Gatcombe Park sort of has this magnetic power.
But I think Zara was thinking back to her own childhood and that she'd love to replicate that for her own children.
Mike and Zara put their house up for sale, ready to move back to the family estate.
The scene was set for Zara and Mike to create their forever home at Gatcombe Park.
The question was, which property would they move into and how would they bring their own personality to Gatcombe Park?
In 2013, Princess Anne's daughter Zara Phillips and her husband, rugby superstar Mike Tindall, moved back to the Gatcombe Park estate.
Zara and Mike moved into the main farmhouse at Aston Farm. Aston Farm had been the home of Mark Phillips, Zara's dad.
Mark Phillips left his home of over 20 years when his second marriage broke down in 2012. After his departure, Aston Farm became home to both of Princess Anne's children.
At the time when Zara and Mike decided to move back to Aston Farm, Zara's brother Peter Phillips was living next door in a barn conversion, and he lived there with his family, his wife Autumn Phillips, and their 2 young daughters.
It is interesting that both her children, Zara and Peter, seem to be like sort of boomerangs. They recurringly return, depending where they're at in their own personal and professional lives.
The success of Gatcombe Park as a home for Princess Anne and her children is largely thanks to its size and layout.
It's a big place, and they've got separate properties, separate homes, so they can see each other whenever they want, and if they don't fancy seeing each other, they can be apart as well. I mean, that's crucial. They're not in the same building.
For Zara, it wasn't just the appeal of being closer to family that drew her back to Gatcombe Park. The estate has always been a perfect fit for her lifestyle.
I'm lucky because both my parents ride, most of my family rides, and where I am, where I live, is a great area for riding.
Living at Aston Farm provides Zara the perfect opportunity for her equestrian career. There are plenty of stables for her horses and, of course, lots of land, which means she can practice regularly.
Over the years, Zara has achieved huge success with her horses.
Zara has very much taken after her parents in that she's an extraordinarily talented rider. She's a brilliant horsewoman. She won the European title in 2005 and she was a member of the British team that won silver in London 2012. The really lovely thing was that the Princess Royal was presenting the medals, and so she was able to present a medal to her own daughter.
Gatcombe Park may have come ready equipped for horsey pursuits, but Zara and Mike felt that the farmhouse at Aston Farm needed a revamp.
After they moved in, they wanted to add their own stamp to the house.
So they did quite an extensive renovation and gave it a really modern touch, so lots of marble, gold taps, that kind of thing.
When updating Aston Farm, Zara and Mike seem to have chosen a popular interior design trend seen in similar properties across Britain. Such as this home, which showcases traditional features like wooden beams and stone floors while adding contemporary fixtures and fittings. But Zara and Mike didn't stop with the decor. They also repurposed some rooms to suit their needs.
The couple added a gun room, of course living in the countryside, a gym, a cinema and a games room. Really brought it up to the 21st century.
And it doesn't sound like the couple went to Princess Anne for interior design advice.
You can see something of a generational shift in the way that Zara and Mike's house is decorated.
It's pretty obvious that Zara's got a different style from her mum. She makes it much more of a kind of modern family home, whereas Anne is all kind of chintz and dog hair. Zara, it's much more marble top, clean lines, luxury bath.
A year after Zara and Mike moved into Aston Farm, they welcomed their first child, Mia.
Mike and Zara created this kind of idyllic, perfect family home at Aston Farm. They extended it where needed. As their family grew, the house grew as well.
Their second daughter, Lena, was born in 2018, and about the same time, they also went through a second round of renovations at the property. That included installing a new kitchen, a toilet and utility, adding an extra bedroom upstairs, but also converting one of the smaller bedrooms into a master ensuite.
The renovations were all finished by the time Zara and Mike welcomed their third child, Lucas, in 2021. And it's just as well, given his unexpected place of birth.
Zara went into labour at home on Aston Farm. When the baby's coming, and so Zara did not make it to hospital.
Zara ended up actually giving birth at home on the bathroom floor.
Zara's friend, who is a midwife, managed to get there in time, but it really was all hands on deck, with Mike helping with the birth.
Mike has spoken about this experience. He was very hands-on.
He's revealed that his most important contribution was to go and grab some crash mats from their gym so that it wouldn't happen on the hard floor of the bathroom. I think that was very thoughtful.
Zara completely inadvertently revived an old royal tradition, which was having babies at home, which of course Queen Elizabeth had always done.
It's kind of classic, no-nonsense Anne Zara story, really, in many respects. She is her mother's daughter in so many ways.
Zara and Mike created their dream family home at Aston Farm. But it wasn't all child's play. The couple also created a space for lavish parties in one of their outbuildings.
One of the advantages of living on such a big estate, of course, is you've got room to spread out. And they do have a party barn there at Aston Farm with a big screen and a bar.
Mike and Zara have always enjoyed a bit of a party together. And for them, it was very important to have that entertaining space.
I'm assuming it must have some good soundproofing because their parties are pretty legendary. And we all know that Mike likes to party.
Mike Tyndall has spilled a few secrets about royal life over the years, including details of what really happens when they let their hair down.
All the royal family love Mike Tyndall. He is a sweet and very funny person. And he's very, very popular. The Queen was very, very fond of him.
Mike has given us some tidbits of what has happened previously at royal parties. When he took part in a reality show a few years ago, he shared one particular anecdote which many of us found highly amusing involving Princess Anne.
Mike organised a birthday party for Zara's 30th. Mike was dancing with his mother-in-law, Princess Anne, when his trousers split, and underneath he had some rather unattractive boxer shorts, and it said on the front, "Nibble my nuts," and Anne just looked at them and said, "I'd rather not."
The response feels very much like Princess Anne. Very dry humour and very on the nose. I think this shows us that Princess Anne is actually quite close to not only her children, but also their partners.
Princess Anne has found her haven at Gatcombe Park, surrounded by her children and grandchildren.
I think it's really been very wonderful for Anne to have this house and this estate where she's been able to spend most weekends to have a wonderful, happy family life.
She's the luckiest of probably all the members of the royal family because she's got this beautiful estate and farm and horses and stables, all the things she loves.
But if there is one downside, I think it's the magnitude of the project that they took on all those years ago.
Anne and Tim have still got the worry of managing the estate, and I think they do a lot of that hands-on.
I'm sure she looks around every day and thinks that needs done. You know, that needs done. Now, there's always a list of things to do. Ask anyone who works on the land. It's never ending.
And the most relentless challenge for the princess is keeping the estate financially viable.
Gatcombe Park is an expensive place to run. It's a huge estate, and the inflation, cost of living crisis has hit them hard. Anne has had to make some very difficult decisions to keep Gatcombe Park afloat.
But will the princess be able to weather this financial storm to secure the future for her beloved home? Princess Anne and her husband Timothy Lawrence adore living at Gatcombe Park, their vast estate in the Gloucestershire countryside.
For Anne, Gatcombe is home. It's where she feels safe, it's where she's away from prying eyes, and it's very much where she can relax.
It is somewhere she can kick off her riding boots, she can have a cup of tea and a quick gin and tonic, and no one is going to disturb her.
And I think it's really quite idyllic to be in such a lovely, secure area with wonderful country pursuits and walks.
And the couple play a very active role in managing Gatcombe Park.
This is a place where Princess Anne and Sir Timothy look after the land. They're the wardens of the land.
Tim Lawrence is now responsible for managing the woodland on this huge, 1,250 acre plus estate, and that's something he absolutely loves doing.
Living on a large country estate has its upsides, but it also comes with financial challenges.
Agriculture is hard. Running a country estate is difficult.
Gatcombe is a really rather large estate. That means it takes a lot of money to keep it going.
From day one, they've had to make financial decisions. Quite rightly, they don't get money from the taxpayer. They have to make it work.
Princess Anne had always said that she couldn't justify having this huge property, having all these acres of land, if it didn't pay for itself.
Bringing in enough cash to fund the estate isn't easy at the best of times, but particularly during a financial downturn.
In March 2024, tough times forced Princess Anne and her family to make a difficult decision.
It was sadly announced that the Festival of British Eventing, after 4 decades nearly, would not continue. It was hit by COVID, and then I think it was hard to get things back together again, to get the sponsorship. Even members of the royal family are affected by the cost of living crisis.
It's a big thing to put on, and if you know that you're going to struggle to break even or to make a profit on it, it's sometimes best to pull the plug. It was not a decision taken lightly. It's a big loss.
I think they must have been quite devastated when they actually had to put an end to it, because it had been such an annual highlight for them on their doorstep with all of the things that they loved so dearly in the world of horses.
It's quite a galvanising moment when you see that the royal family, who are trying hard to maintain their own properties through their own efforts and industry and ingenuity, are suffering like the rest of us.
With the annual horse competition gone, Gatcombe Park's other income streams are more important than ever. And Princess Anne's equine facilities bring in vital funds for the estate.
Gatcombe Park is still, absolutely full of horses.
Just behind Gatcombe House is the huge stables operation that is part of the estate. Anne keeps her horses there, Zara keeps her horses there, Team GB member Tom McEwen keeps his horses there. Some very wealthy men pay Princess Anne a lot of money to keep their horses there.
The princess has always been very hands-on with horses, and she's hugely involved in breeding programmes and supervising. I think it's very much a part of her home life.
The farm is also essential to the estate's survival.
It very much is a working farm run by Anne and Tim and their estate manager as a business.
The princess rears Gloucester Old Spot pigs and White Park cattle and Wiltshire Horn sheep, and selling their meat locally is what keeps the whole thing ticking over.
The farm today is run as native breeds, grass-fed, organic, and the reason they took this decision was a very commercial decision. It's because those animals command the best possible prices.
They have to keep on their toes. They have to keep across of what works for the estate and what's going to keep it viable.
Princess Anne has explained that farming at Gatcombe Park using these methods is the only way they can turn a profit. It's also a sustainable choice.
Native breeds have never been more important because they need less sort of food, less medicine. They leave a much lighter carbon footprint and they're more ecologically sound.
Over the years, Princess Anne has been heavily involved in managing the agricultural side of Gatcombe Park. But becoming a farmer wasn't her original plan.
When Gatcombe Park became her home in 1977, they hadn't intended to run it as a commercial farm, but I think out of necessity they've had to run it as a farm because I suppose the costs are high. So I think it's given Anne and Mark and now Anne and Tim and the children a great sense of fulfilment.
Running Gatcombe Park has become a passion for Princess Anne. But what does the future look like for the estate and its role in royal life?
I think Gatcombe Park is the forever home for Anne and Tim. I mean, it's obviously where she's happy. She's been very happy there since the late 1970s.
I think there's absolutely no doubt that whatever happens, Zara and Peter will keep Gatcombe going. The last thing in the world they want to do is to have to sell it, and they won't.
But there's another hurdle on the horizon. The budget could make Gatcombe liable for inheritance tax. With Gatcombe Park's value estimated to be around £6 million, Anne's children could be faced with a hefty bill when they eventually inherit the estate.
It will be a challenge for Zara and Peter to keep it as a going concern, but it always has been.
Let's hope it passes down the generations as the late Queen would have wished when she bought it for Anne in 1976.